Assalamualaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Pakistan Experience. वैसे तो पाकिस्तान हमेशा ही नाजुक मोड़ पर होता है, लेकिन आजकल एक खास नाजुक मोड़ पर है. तो जर्नलिस्ट एक्स्ट्राऑर्डिनेयर accused often of being one of the boys. तो मैंने सोचा इनसे बेहतर कौन होगा महाज करने के लिए. Mr. Wajahat Khan is here with us. How are you doing, sir?
Good. Always ready to be one of the boys or the girls. Ever ready, but yes.
ये I will come to that. उस पे भी एक दो मैसेजेस आए हैं मुझे, लेकिन बॉयज पे पहले फोकस करते हैं, गर्ल्स पे वापस फोकस करेंगे. You're doing a podcast on the Asia stream. You're writing for G0 Media, and you're also working for Nikkei Asia. Am I saying that right?
I mean, yeah, most of it was accurate. Yeah.
रट्टे मारे हुए मैं. तो ये पैलेस इंट्रीग पे आपने आर्टिकल लिखा है. सीधी बात करते हैं. आई थिंक मोस्ट ऑफ आवर मल्टीमीडिया एंड इवन सोशल मीडिया एंड मास मीडिया घुमा फिरा के बातें करते हैं. सीधी बात बताएं, क्या चल रहा है with Imran Khan?
I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? This really is the statistics speak for themselves. Imran Khan is the 22nd Prime Minister, and the 21 men and women, one woman before him, have not finished their term. Assassinations, coups, other sorts of legal encumbrances have gotten in the way. That's stat one. Stat two is that Qamar Javed Bajwa, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, is the 16th Army Chief, 6th if you count it according to the 10th if you count it according to the old way, the new way, which is COAS, 16th if you count it according to the CNC way, the Commander-in-Chief way. He's had, I'm curious, just by that very stat, that prime ministers are supposed to run for and finish a term for 5 years, but there's 22 of them. And army chiefs are supposed to be around for 3 years, but there's 16 of them. Something about this math doesn't make sense. This math is fuzzy. तो अगर आपको मेरी तरह थोड़ा बहुत हिसाब भी आता है, मुझे बिल्कुल नहीं आता. It's always been one of my weakest links. But even I can figure out that the math doesn't make sense. कि एक कम टर्म वाला बंदा जो है वो कम क्यों है? कम टर्म वाले तो ज्यादा होने चाहिए. So then, premised on that, here's a fact that General Bajwa comes from a line of soldiers who have done a pretty good job of sticking around beyond their regular term. 4 of them have led the country or ruled the country directly through some sort of emergency, coup, overtake, takeover, whatever. Martial law. Not all of them have instituted martial law, by the way. Then on the other hand, जो चक्कर है वो ये है कि there's a new lead from behind sort of ethic in the post-Musharraf world. And this new lead from behind ethic is now premised on extensions, which is, well, it's allowable in times of emergency, in case of war. I can see how jang lagi hui hai, removing the army chief in the middle of you don't change your... मुझे याद है तुम छोटे होगे शहजाद, मगर जब ये जनरल कियानी ने जब ये प्रेसिडेंट सेट किया था, तो वो एक बड़ी फेमस एक saying चल रही थी कि you don't change horses in the middle of the race, So, अच्छा, that made sense in a way, and that was the reason premise behind Kiyani's extension. But it was a slippery slope because jang lagi hui thi, बहुत intense jang lagi hui thi. 2011-12 by any standards in the long arc of the war on terror, जो पाकिस्तान में people think it started in 2001. Frankly, Pakistan has been fighting terrorism since the late 80s, early 90s, right? But we'll come to that. That's a whole other premise. The fact that you don't change your race horse during the middle of the race, whatever, jo bhi saying hai, it made sense during a time of war because Kiyani was a wartime general. His ISI chief, Shuja Pasha, was a wartime ISI chief. As they say here in New York, the fit was hitting the shan. Things were bad, right? So yeah, even a lot of people, including a very liberal and very left-leaning and not a very pro-army PPP government, gave that extension under Zardari, President Zardari, and then President Zardari. So जंग के दौरान में एक्सटेंशन देना ठीक है, मेक सेंस in a way. I mean, but it's a slippery slope because एक precedent set हो जाता है कि ये एक नई पख है, right? But I think the extension, the climate of the extension, even though Pakistan is not out of the waters, Afghanistan is still very complicated. 3 years ago, Afghanistan was as complicated, even more complicated than it is now, but it'll continue to be complicated. But we are in a rough neighborhood. And if there is a case to be made, कि extension upon extension, chalti jaye, even when you're not on full-time wartime footing, then थोड़ी सी जो नजरियाती डिबेट है ना वो थोड़ी सी और छिड़ती है. The Bajwa extension 3 years ago was very different from the Kiyani extension in 2011. This is, you got to admit this and deal with it, because the Pakistan and the wartime Pakistan, Marriott mein bum phat rahe hain, you know, like madness was going on in the middle of the capital. War on terror हुई है, Osama was just taken out, Raymond Davis हो रहा है, Salala हुआ है, drone war चल रही है, madness, right? Hillary Clinton से बात नहीं कर रहा था क्या? It was that bad, right? Ties were about to cut off. CIA के स्टेशन चीफ के नाम लीक किए जा रहे हैं शीरी मजारी के अखबार में. It was a shit show. Versus now, when things are relatively more stable, so case क्या बनता है? So in that sense, that extension versus this extension was very different. And I think that's where the slip between the cup and the lip happens, where there's, in the beginning, you could see that Khan's government was very, very lockstep, peas and carrots, very tightly related and in sync with the Bajwa regime in GHQ. But you can start seeing over the course of the closer we got to this ye jo change of the guard wala saal tha, ye wala, the closer we got to this, 6-8 महीने पहले से मसले चल रहे थे. फौजियों के साल में ना 2 बार ट्रांसफर होते हैं, एक सर्दियों में होते हैं, गर्मियों में होते हैं, ठीक है? तो वो जो सर्दियों वाले जो ट्रांसफर थे, जो पिछले अक्टूबर नवंबर वाले जो थे, वो उसमें यू रिमेंबर दिस फैज की एक्सटेंशन नहीं मैं कर रहा हूँ, नहीं मैं, फिर वो जो दूसरे डीजी हैं उन्हें लगा दिया. कैसे लगा दिया? सवाल बनता है, कैसे लगा दिया आपने बंदा यार? कैसे लगा दिया आपने अपनी मर्जी का बंदा? मैं प्राइम मिनिस्टर हूँ, मेरा काम है, आपका काम नहीं है. और वो वाहिद पोस्ट है जो एक्चुअली पीएम को टेक्निकली ऑन पेपर रिपोर्ट करता है, राइट? वाहिद पोस्ट है फौज में. मतलब वो तुम अगर कप्तान हो और तुम्हें कोई लगा दे कहीं मानसेरा से, तुम्हें मालाकांड में लगा दे, तो दैट्स अ डिफरेंट स्टोरी because you're too junior. But that is one post which is allowed, right? As a prime minister, अगर तुम कप्तान लगे हुए हो किसी यूनिट में, I can't meddle with it. So I understand that even though I'm the most powerful, technically the most powerful man in the country, I can't say कि शहजाद को कराची में लगा. It's wrong. It's illegal. This is where it begins. It begins last year, and now it's sort of revisiting us closer to it. That's one narrative. The other narrative is that Imran Khan has had a dubious 4 years. He's been filled with hubris and high-handedness. He's muzzled the media. One of the reasons I've left that country, we'll come to that later. He's muzzled the media. He's tried to imprison and suppress his opposition. He's not he's in power. He's not as nice as he was supposed to be, as he promised. He's over-promised, under-delivered. The team he has picked is mediocre at best, and not curious about, not interested in governance at worst. He has not managed to score any major wins in his anti-kleptocracy, anti-corruption campaign. In fact, he's harassed. It looks like, in retrospect, 4 years, कि शहजाद को भी जेल है, तो मरियम नवाज भी जेल में गई है, तो ज़रदारी साहब को भी थे, तो जो भी है. It just looks like he's just harassed people. And they say in politics that you've got to keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And this is a parliamentary system. There's multi-party democracy, right? वो पठानों के, वो JUIF वाले पठान जो मौलवी हैं, उनके अलग इशू हैं. अच्छा, जो मियाँ वाली के पठान हैं, उनके अलग इशू हैं. कराची के मुहाजिरों के अलग इशू हैं. राइट, साउथ पंजाब की सराय की बेल्ट के अलग इशू हैं। तो आप यू कांट स्टे विद इन द वैली, द ब्यूटीफुल लवली परफेक्ट 4 सीजन वाली वैली ऑफ इस्लामाबाद, डू योर पुशअप्स एंड go for your morning run and pretend, wear your black shalwar kameez and pretend everything's going to be fine, because it's not fine. You got to engage the other guy, you got to get your hands dirty.
It's almost irrelevant, right, कि इमरान खान की परफॉर्मेंस क्या है, because that's not really what is happening. जो प्रिंसिपल स्टांसेस की बात है, मेरा भी प्रिंसिपल स्टांस ये है कि जितनी भी बुरा सिविलियन प्राइम मिनिस्टर है should not be ousted because it's unconstitutional. Prime ministers have completed their terms under military dictators, Shaukat Aziz Jamali, even though they didn't do the 5 years, and we've had a checkered history. 3 prime ministers assassinate हो चुके हैं one way or another, exile हो चुके हैं, but like if we talk about facts, there's only one chair that truly matters. Jitna hum lawyers movement ko credit de dein, is it unfair to say General Kiyani removed General Musharraf?
I think it's not unfair to say, nor is it entirely accurate to say. I think it needs to be let me just shut my thingies down. I think it's fairly accurate in retrospect to ascertain. देखो, you have to look at things not within just कि एक चीज नहीं होती। अभी ना खाली मैं और तुम बात नहीं कर रहे, बहुत सारी और चीजें दुनिया में होती। 2007-8 में ना 3 चीजें हुई। 2007-8
all I'm saying is एक चीज के बगैर वो चीज नहीं होती।
हाँ, मगर 2007-8 में 3 चीजें हुई जिन्होंने पाकिस्तान को बदल दिया, और ये शायद हम रियलाइज नहीं करते, बट हमें करना चाहिए। और ये मैंने रेट्रोस्पेक्ट रियलाइज किया जब 2007-8 में 6-8 साल गुजर गए, फिर मैंने रियलाइज किया कि हुआ क्या है। मैं भी गाली देने वाला था।
Go for it, ये हम ना काट कर इसको प्रोमो बनाएंगे।
अच्छा, तो हुआ ये है, नहीं यार, बच्चे हैं। ओके, सो हियर्स द थिंग, हुआ ये है कि 2007 में भाईजान पहले तो बेनजीर असैसिनेट होती हैं, ठीक है, धचका नंबर 1। धचका नंबर 2 इज विंटर में, 2007 की विंटर में। 2008 की गर्मियों में मुशर्रफ इज सेड खुदाफिज, पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद। और 2008 की सर्दियों में बॉम्बे पे अटैक होता है, ठीक है, मुंबई अटैक होता है। नाउ these 3 events reshape the future that Pakistan under the Musharraf dispensation was taking through the last 9 years and through the course of the war on terror. Condi Rice has written about this. Extensive people have commented on this, written books about this. So, but let's try to compress everything and just put it together for you. The Musharraf formula, and इसमें उनके फॉरेन मिनिस्टर साहब कसूरी साहब ने भी लिखा, अलग-अलग लोगों ने अलग-अलग इनपुट दिया। Musharraf wanted to solve Kashmir, and Musharraf wanted a hybrid formula, जिधर फौज भी और जो डेमोक्रेट्स हैं वो एक साथ lockstep चले. He offered himself as the perfect strong man, liberal enough to work with the Americans, right? Tolerant enough to work with the local Democrats, and the जो so-called इनका जो compound बना, जो एक hybrid, एक democracy बनी, उसमें बेनजीर ने ऐसे आना था, मुशर्रफ ने ऐसे आना था. Strong man, liberal dictator, but also a acceptable, internationally recognized liberal Democrat. तो ये एक तरफ elected है, बेनजीर as prime minister, मुशर्रफ as president. So वो तो बात उन्होंने खत्म हो गई with Rawalpindi. Here, the second thing was, of course, Musharraf had serious plans, had serious plans, and got very close, and Kusuri's written this in his book. He had got very close to solving Kashmir, again under the aegis of this more tolerant sort of liberal dictator. Parties, the powers that be, which don't want to solve Kashmir, on whatever side, I'm going to let you leave that to your imagination for now. They said, General Saab, I think it's time for you to, buzz off to Dubai, right? It's been great, but it's over. Thank you. Thanks, but no thanks. Musharraf is removed. He's first advised to take off his uniform, and jab uniform nahi raha, to mess hall mein sherwanis are not allowed or appreciated. ठीक है, और उसके अपने internal reasons हैं कि किसने क्या किया, क्या stakes थे. खाली एक बंदा नहीं था उसमें, एक जनरल नहीं कर सकता. फौज एक बड़ा composite और एक बड़ा complicated इदारा है, बड़ा sophisticated इदारा है. तो एक ये नहीं कहा कि कियानी ने फोन करके ये नहीं कहा कि मैं कर दूंगा.
What I
इसके
was
पीछे एक
getting
पूरा
at by
premise था.
saying that was, yes, Kashmir might have been a factor, but ये तो undeniable है ना कि it's not like the Fauj likes extensions as well, because बारी अगर आपकी आने
No.
वाली है तो आपकी रह जाती है. अगर मुशर्रफ 10 साल बैठा हुआ है तो जिन जिन की बारियां आनी थी वो रह जाती हैं. एजाजुल हक
भाई
हैज क्वाइट क्लियरली अलूडेड कि इनसाइड जॉब थी जियाउल हक. सो अगर एक जनरल 10 साल रहता है, वो फौज को भी पसंद नहीं आती बात.
नहीं, you know why? Because you have to understand कि चक्कर क्या है. देखो, जब चीफ आता है ना, जब नया नया चीफ आता है, तो वो 7-8 लेफ्टिनेंट जनरल्स जो सीनियर है ना, उनमें से आता है. ठीक है. और उस वक्त वो होता है तकरीबन 53-54. मैं प्रोफाइल दे रहा हूँ, कोई भी चीफ आता है, क्योंकि एज एन LTG दैट्स व्हाट यू आर. ठीक है. अच्छा, पहले ना इट्स जो इमीडिएटली जो पहली कोर कमांडर्स कॉन्फ्रेंस होती है ना, उसमें द टेबल इज वेरी राउंड. ही इज लाइक किंग आर्थर. ठीक है. मगर जिस किंग आर्थर राउंड टेबल जिन्हें नहीं समझ आती है, फेमस व्हाटएवर, राइट, फेबल, right? King Arthur didn't exist, by the way, for those who are listening. It's a complete, product of our imagination about equity, first among equals, right? So पहली टेबल बड़ी राउंड होती है पहली कोर कमांडर्स कॉन्फ्रेंस में, right? But over the months and years, the table starts getting very long, right? Because जो आपके बैचमेट्स होते हैं पहले, जो जिन 7-8 को आपने बीट किया होता है या सुपरसीड किया होता है, एक तो वो अगले 3-4 महीने में 6 महीने वो घर चले जाते हैं, राइट. इमीडिएटली एक नई खेप आती है, राइट. फिर एक नई खेप आती है. आई टोल्ड यू 2 बार ट्रांसफर होते हैं, खेपें आती जाती हैं, राइट. सो यू आर गोइंग थ्रू अ वेरी फास्ट सॉर्ट ऑफ टर्न अराउंड. सो बाय द टाइम यू आर रिटायर्ड 3 साल में, जो आपका, आप कह लो कि बंदा कोई आपका DGMO होगा, काफी सारे बैचेस आपसे जूनियर होगा, राइट, मेजर जनरल होगा आपका, वो आपके साथ आपका CGS बन के बैठा होता है, राइट. तो यू आर इन अ वेरी लाइक, अच्छा, मगर वो इंतजार कर रहे हैं, बाकी भी लड़के जो हैं वो इंतजार कर रहे हैं, बिकॉज 3 साल वो ऊपर आ रहे हैं, राइट. और यस, द टेबल इज नाउ वेरी लॉन्ग. मगर अगर वो उसका वक्त आपने उसे नहीं दिया, एंड ही इज आउट, राइट, एंड यू आर स्टिल ऑन, तो फिर दो किस्म के मसले शुरू होते हैं. पहला मसला, ये पैलेस इंट्रीग शुरू हो जाती है कि यार WTF, राइट, ये क्या बकवास है. अच्छा, फौज इतना डिसिप्लिन इदारा है कि आप WTF कह नहीं सकते, राइट. शायद अपनी बेगम को आप कह दें, मगर यू कांट गो ना उनसे. आप मेस हॉल में भी रात को सिगरेट पीते हुए, चाय पीते हुए अपने GOC से ऐसी बातें नहीं कर सकते, राइट, कि यार क्या बकवास है, राइट. मगर फ्रैंकली ये मियांडरिंग शुरू हो जाती है, ये पॉलिटिक्स शुरू हो जाती है, राइट. एंड वो फिर इदारे में फिल्टर डाउन होना शुरू हो जाती है, राइट. दूसरा जो एक पहला डिसएडवांटेज है, उसे आप, वो ह्यूमन नेचर है, उसे आप कंट्रोल नहीं कर सकते, राइट. एवरीबॉडी वांट्स टू सर्व. मैंने अगर फौज में 18 साल की उम्र में ज्वाइन किया है, 53 तक मैंने, वन ऑफ द वर्ल्ड स्टीपेस्ट पिरामिड्स, मैंने पाक फौज का बहुत स्टीप पिरामिड, बड़े जल्दी आपको निकाल लेते हैं. 90-95% लड़का बाय द टाइम ही इज मेजर, तुम्हारी एज का लड़का इज गॉन. इतना बड़ा वॉश आउट रेट है, right? By the time you're 34, 35, boom, gone. Thank you. It's been a great ride, right? So the pyramid is very steep. मगर इमेजिन करोगे, मैं 18 साल की उम्र से किया, 53 तक मैंने पिरामिड सर्वाइव किया, और there's some power hungry guy for whatever reason, but in my head he's power hungry. शायद जंग लगी है, शायद जो भी है, जो कहता है, okay, Waj, thanks for being my 3-star. I'm sticking around and you're not, right? Bye-bye. So that creates, I think that creates complications. Those complications have been seen in different ways. They play out in different ways. They play out in different sort of intrigues. There's enough studies to show that they complicate the internal mechanisms, which takes me to the other side of the army, because it starts politicizing the army, which is in our case, in our country, the army is already politicized. But I think it also starts creating mechanical problems within the army, right? It starts creating morale problems within the army. It starts creating structural problems within the army. And based on that, considering how the army works, ये by the way, ये और किसी इदारे में नहीं होता, because और भी इदारे, we sort of forget, the Air Force है, Navy है. And उनके बहुत अलग merit based parameters हैं. वो एक और discussion है कि तीनों इदारों में
longer discussion
फर्क क्या है.
65 में तो एयरफोर्स मार्शल जो थे उन्होंने बोला मुझे तो पता भी नहीं था जंग शुरू हो गई थी. So why the army is so strong? Maybe that's a longer discussion.
It's the most. I think it's one of the most complicated questions to answer. But yeah, that's another show.
Yeah, I think that's a much longer discussion. अगर हम वापस अभी के facts पे आ जाएं, you also said कि Prime Minister की appointment है. Technically, constitutionally, I agree with you. But मेरे अंदर का lawyer जाग रहा है. If I may lay down the facts for you, and if you disagree with any of them, then you will have the floor.
I mean, if it's a fact, I can't disagree with it.
No, I mean, but as I see them, as I see them. So, allegedly, General Faiz, set up the elections for PTI. Imran Khan को लेकर आए. Yes, factually, Prime Minister का हक है. But and maybe I'll give you the evidence for where the facts are coming from. Imran Khan, who's seen as the mouthpiece of the establishment, उन्होंने recently एक vlog बनाया, खुलकर आकर ये बात की कि फैज के अपॉइंटमेंट की वजह से सेम पेज जो आर्मी और पीटीआई का है वो फटा. So General Faiz removal from DGISI, making him corps commander in Peshawar. The army, or at least General Bajwa, was not happy with that. The appointment of General Nadeem was politicized by Imran Khan. So अब जो हो रहा है, if the establishment is using the opposition to oust Imran Khan, it's to ensure, I'm not saying it's to ensure Bajwa gets an extension, but it's to ensure that General Faiz is not made the next chief of army staff, which by right is the Prime Minister prerogative. But again, like most things get muddied in Pakistan. What's principle, what's constitutional? If the idea is that Imran Khan wants to appoint General Faiz so that he gets another 5 years undemocratically, unconstitutionally, so even though it's his constitutional right, how constitution is that? What's your take on this scenario, or at least my reading of this scenario?
My take is that all of this is very cyclical, right? I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds of any of this, but here are some facts, and we'll balance this out because I like to make like debates which are, I like to engage in debates where you can like span over time and see trends, but also, so in the late 50s, early 60s, there's a chap called Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who comes out of nowhere. He's a lawyer from Berkeley. He comes out of nowhere. He joins yes, he was from a political background. His father was a high official, a prime minister of a small state, but that's not the point. The point is that he was picked up and literally picked up by Ayub Khan, groomed, empowered, enabled, launched, all right, into a internationally recognized foreign minister, which he was pretty good at his gig. He was pretty good, right? All credit to ZAB. And then he ditches Ayub Khan when he sort of sees in the 69, 68 riots where things are going, and then he launches his own party, and he still needs the GHQ at this time is pretty traumatized. Half of the army is in India as POW. But the fact is that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was single-handedly picked and groomed by the army, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto went and worked with the army through the 71 war, Yahya Khan, etc., etc. These are very akele wo nahi ban gaye the, jo ban gaye the. And then when he grew a mind of his own, at some point, when he got too big for his boots, there was a coup and he was sent to the gallows. This is a very long, extensive 20-25 saal ki kahani hai. ठीक है? खाली 77 की गर्मियों में इमरान वो ज़िया-ul-Haq को ख्वाब नहीं आया था, ये हो रहा था. It was a long play, right? But he was this, and this was a slow attrition. Acha. Moving on, next decade, same thing. Nawaz Sharif is picked by the next guy, single-handed, groomed, internationalized, empowered, enabled, and sort of comes up the ranks, first in the Punjab Provincial Assembly, then as Punjab Chief Minister, eventually gets to become Prime Minister. Shorter ascent than ZAB. ZAB's ascent starts much earlier. Things are sort of accelerated now. But again, when he grows a mind of his own, right, technically he was allowed to choose Zauddin Butt, if you recall. Pata nahi tumhe yaad hai ki nahi, but debate thi ki is he allowed? Yes, he's allowed. He's allowed to do whatever the F he wants. He's the goddamn prime minister, right? So he can definitely send one guy and take over one, right? And even though, yes, on paper, he's allowed to do that, that's not how things work on paper. Things are complicated. You have to follow protocol. You have to go through people's terms. You can't break this. Is a very traditional, there's an old saying that the only thing tougher to put a new idea into an army is to take an old idea out of it, right? So you can't have a guy who's not an infantryman, not from the fighting arms. You can't have an engineer run the army. You just can't. I mean, if you understand the army, you just can't do that. It doesn't make sense, right? It's just wrong for the army. It's not just demoralizing, it's also like destructive. So that triggers a coup, a second coup. Again, guys picked up, long story short, guys picked up, groomed, enabled, empowered, kicked out when he's got a mind of his own. And it seems to me that now, similarly, we're seeing once again that there's a guy who's picked up, groomed, enabled, empowered, right? We don't have to get into who helped who, because it's a long play. Because Khan was picked up in 96, 97, first groomed through the Hamid Gul school, then groomed past into the 2000, then he went into the wilderness, then groomed again through the Shuja Pasha school, then again enabled through the Faiz school. So this is not one DG Faiz. This is not about one guy. So stop making about one guy. Make it
with
about
some
Khan.
footsie with Musharraf in the middle as well.
Yeah, but I'm talking about. But he said no to Musharraf, right? Within a very short span of time, he didn't play ball with Musharraf, became an opposition member. Good for him. But he didn't cut off those contacts, which is really interesting because tell me one thing. In his 22, 24, 96 में शुरू किया क्या 24-25 साल के political career, right? Tell me one thing. Give me one example where Imran Ahmad Khan Niazi, Pakistan's 22nd Prime Minister, 68-year-old Imran Ahmad Khan Niazi Saab, has said one thing, and give me one thing in his 20-something year political career, which has been incongruent with the political views of GHQ. एक issue दे.
Leaked, जो एक leaked audio tape थी, you must have seen that from the container as well, where he went after the generals quite directly.
नहीं went after the generals नहीं, मैं policy की बात कर रहा हूँ. मैं तुम्हें गाली दूँ, it doesn't mean that I disagree with you यार. But if I don't like you, गाली देना किसी को, ये करना वो करना, it's different. I'm talking about, देखो, Pakistan's military establishment, foreign policy regime, these are all interlinked idaras, right? Military अकेला नहीं बनाती, उसमें foreign office भी होता है, ये होता है. तो एक there's a national narrative. There's a national narrative on Kashmir. There's a national narrative on Afghanistan. There's a national narrative on India, on America, on China, on Russia these days, right? ऐवी नहीं आप करता. अच्छा, नजरियाती फर्क होता है. You might have a very different opinion than me. For example, Benazir had a very different opinion with the army on AQ Khan and Pakistan's nukes. I think some people assess she paid for it with her life, right? Who knows what the facts of what happened were, but you don't go off the rails. Khan in 26 years may have said stupid stuff, or they have said stupid stuff about him. I'm sure they talk trash about each other, but in terms of not stupid stuff, but stuff which is not deferential to a particular general or a particular situation, but in terms of deference to the military-led establishment's overall foreign policy, I don't think that Khan has said anything which would
that Imran Khan's a Sheikh Rashid, who will always be differential. He's spoken about army's involvement in politics and how he's against that. Again, फिर आपको पता भी नहीं होता ना GHQ.
नहीं, but I'm talking.
नहीं, but drones. Imran Khan was very against drones when Musharraf and the civilian government of that time were supporting drones. If you tell me that actually GHQ was against drones and they were playing the double game, that's something else. But the state official government policy was allowing drones, and Imran Khan was anti-drones.
No, GHQ was actually, for the longest time, GHQ was not only just allowing drones, but also, in a way, this whole anti-drone narrative was also being fanned by GHQ at the same time, because it had one hand tied behind its back. On the one hand, you can't stop the Americans because you don't have the capacity to stop them. Then you don't have the capacity to fight your own war. So the Americans said, hey, we're going to do this whether you like it or not. So might as well do it. And that's good advice, right? They took it. But on the other hand, it remains a breach of our sovereignty. And they didn't take it lying down. So if you talk to General Musharraf, who oversaw those drone operations, he'll tell you the same thing. He said, we didn't have a choice, but did they keep on fanning the flames of the anti-drone narrative? Yes, Khan was a part of that. So many people were a part of that. So you can't stop and that takes us to the whole, like, the stated policy and I guess you can say the actual policy. Yeah. And in terms of actual policies, I don't see one example where Imran Khan, in his 20-something year career as a Pakistani politician, leader, whatever, a diplomat, has swayed away or gone off the rails and done his own thing. People who have done their own thing, they've paid for it dearly. Nawaz Sharif did his own thing with India. He's still paying for it. Benazir did her own thing with the Americans. She may have already paid for it if you want to assess it that way. So
मेरी भी वही assessment है जो आपकी assessment है. But recent rifts तो हैं. So for instance, Bajwa spoke about geoeconomics and resuming trade ties with India, which Imran Khan signed as the commerce minister and then rejected his own signature as the prime minister, which caused a rift. His visit to Russia was a rift. At least it is rumored that the GHQ wants to tilt towards the US and, sort of balance our tilt towards China with our tilt towards US, because a lot of our weaponry comes from there, whereas Imran Khan's anti-American rhetoric has not helped there. So ये recently थोड़े बहुत friction तो हमें नजर आ रही है.
And that's already playing out now. So again, the whole point is, it's premised on that, okay, when you start growing a mind of your own, which you're allowed to, because you are an elected leader, right? Then some people don't think that should be the case. I am not in a position to tell you which general out of the 8 or 9 core commanders and the 17 overall जो हैं formation commanders जो भी बैठते हैं, PSOs वगैरह जो 16-17 जो लड़के हैं, उसमें से कौन प्रो रशिया है, तो कौन प्रो फलाना है, तो कौन प्रो जियो है, तो कौन हार्डकोर है, तो कौन हॉक है, ना कौन डव है. We're not going to have that conversation. The problem is that there's a guy who's now got a mind of his own. He wants to run the ISI in one way, wants to appoint someone another way. He wants to deal with the Russians the third way. He wants to deal with the Chinese and the Americans in the fourth way. And that is his constitutionally granted right. Your constitutionally granted duty is to go home, right? Now, but you don't think so. So that's where the realpolitik of Pakistani politics comes in, and that's sad.
तो उस round table या जो long table है, उधर जो Game of Thrones हो रहा है, that's really what's happening. Otherwise, the democracy is a reality show in Pakistan, right?
I mean, yeah, देखो हर इदारे में you put 2 guys in a room, politics शुरू हो जाती है. Put a third person in a room, election शुरू हो जाता है, right? I mean, that's just human nature, favoritism शुरू हो जाता है. So 2 people in a room, competition begins. 3 people in a room, election begins. Everything is inherently politicized. So yeah, one can say that.
So what would you say is the solution, right? So everybody is real politics अब है. It's almost like we've taken for granted. भाई आर्मी का role तो है ही ना politics में. ये तो होगा. There is no way out of that.
I think the sad bit is that the solution is that if the opposition, which we haven't talked about at all. We've made it look like it's a 2-way thing. There's actually a third player here, right? And that's the PDM, right? They have a lot of votes. They have more votes and more seats than this guy who we're talking about, than Imran, right? And I feel like that if duly elected and respectable opposition leaders who have seen the course of history, right? मुझ जैसे तुम जैसे जवान नहीं है, हम तो we haven't seen it the way they've seen it. Then they see कि यार, when you start working with the powers that be, ठीक है, even if it's for tactical short-term reasons, which they're starting to make noises like yesterday. One opposition leader said, "Okay, warning you, don't appoint a new chief. Yeah. We're going to take to the streets." I mean, how
Not
is
an
that
opposition
related to?
MNA, a PTI MNA. आमिर लियाकत ने video बना लिया. उसकी अपनी पार्टी का.
Well, उसने भी बोला, वो तो खैर, he's a special, very
But
special
you know
character.
where he got that message from.
Yeah, but that's stating the obvious, right? We're trying to get a solution in. So the solution is that Amir Liaquat doesn't matter in the greater scheme, but the more important people who matter are people like Zardari, people like Nawaz Sharif, Shahbaz Sharif, their closest advisors, who I respect these people. These are seasoned veterans. Mariam, Bilawal might not have it because they're younger, so they don't see the big picture like the older chaps do. If you do take to the streets, if you do pull through with this, if you do once again do the master's bidding, assuming that the master has asked you to do his bidding in that case, right? You once again defeat the larger purpose, which is the continuity of the democratic process, regardless of how messy it is. And by setting up, we were pretty close. Listen, I'm no fan of Imran, right? He's had serious issues. In fact, his government's one of the reasons, their treatment of Pakistani media is one of the reasons, is perhaps the largest reason I left my own country. That's why I'm here in New York. So let's not even go there. This is not a partisan debate, just a full disclaimer. But I am a fan of continuity and stability, right? Regardless of which shape it comes in. And I think by disrupting continuity and stability and keeping that same old horrible record, the world's worst political track record is the Pakistani premiership's track record. By keeping up to that, ek saal reh gaya. Let the voters have their say, right? Let the people of Pakistan decide, right? Don't let 16 guys in GHQ decide if that's what you're doing. Maybe that's not what you're doing. Maybe you are doing exactly what you think is right. Maybe he hasn't handled inflation. Maybe he hasn't been a very benevolent prime minister. Maybe he has harassed the opposition, and maybe he is a real SOB. You know, maybe he is all of those things. But does that really garner the situation right now, when you are still in the midst of a pandemic, when there is still, Pakistan is going through a very slippery slope with this US versus Russia thing right now? Would you really want to change the horse during mid-course? Because this is also, there's two horses here, right?
Nobody wants to be in the interim government. Nobody wants to take power. सब यही चाहते थे कि 5 साल पूरे करे और जितना जलील होना है. Already महंगाई, IMF, laws, जलालत चल रही है. The only reason I feel that they have been, their hand has been pushed is the November appointment. क्योंकि नवंबर से पहले अब ये होना है.
But that's speculation, Shahzad Sahab. That is speculation, right? That is one man's opinion.
नहीं, काफी solid speculation है, because you also see what anchors which are seen to be on either side are saying, right? I love Najam Sethi. I think he has a lot of knowledge. But one can assume he's in the know with PMLN. So if Najam Sethi is saying something, you can assume PMLN ये सोच रही है.
नहीं, clearly, but that's where the reporting and the analysis comes in. But yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, either ways it's both. I think you may have a point there, but till it's quite obvious, right? It's like is hamam mein sab nange, like everybody's to blame for this. I think Khan is to blame for this. I think the opposition playing footsie with the powers that be are to blame for this, and I think the powers that be are particularly to blame for this, considering their own track record and the way where Pakistan finds itself. So the larger argument is that, would you want to make this, is this about one man or is this about one country? Right? What is it? Which do you prefer? Right?
It's about self-interest of different people.
Yeah, that's politics, man. That's so, I mean, why are you doing this show? Why am I doing this show? Everybody has self-interest. Everybody wants to, do things in their own way. So that's natural. But there's a larger call here. There's a larger purpose here, and it's very difficult. I think the only solution out of this is if the battle lines are drawn, then all sides need to sit down and come up with some sort of a compromise where the country's stability is not hurt. But perhaps Khan can induct people from the opposition within his ranks. Perhaps the general can cut a deal with if he has particular ambitions and plans. By the way, you're allowed a 1-year extension, 2-year extension, 3-year extension. You know, there's different things you can do. It's not just ke ek hi teen. It's not like that. It's different. I remember Kiyani got an extension, Shuja Pasha got an extension, but Shuja Pasha got like a year's extension. You'll have to go back and fact check on it. He didn't get a 3 extensions, FYI, right? So you can get a 6 months or whatever, right? If something in particular, you have to see something in particular. And then Khan really needs to get his shit together, right? Because he's just, overall, he's just been, I don't even want to get started. So it's just,
Khan की policy is another nightmare. But वो जो self-interest वाली बात थी वो यही थी कि PMLN and PPP see this कि अगर November cross कर लिया इमरान खान ने तो फिर ये अगले 5 साल भी आ जाएगा. It doesn't matter who people vote.
You don't know that. No, you don't know that.
I'm saying that's what PPPs and PMLN's calculations are. I'm not saying I know that. I'm saying this is what they've calculated.
Let the people vote, yeah. This is about us. Why don't we get it? This is not about them. Let the people vote. Let us decide ना कि महंगाई में जो आपने माँ बहन की है सबकी वो should we understand your argument कि ये global problem है or should we understand the opposition's argument कि इमरान खान का problem इसने create. तो हम भी थोड़े बहुत पढ़े लिखे हैं, हमने भी डिग्रियां शिग्रियां ली हुई हैं, हमारा भी कुछ है बीच में था ना, हमें आने दो. अगर हमें आप गधा घोड़ा अपना ट्रीट करोगे जैसे आप करते रहे हो कि हर एक जो है the voters don't matter clearly, फिर वही है ना कि listen, there are enough examples of the opposition movements through the 60s, through the 70s, into the 80s, well into the 90s, of the opposition working with the powers that be to disrupt an ongoing, duly elected, or maybe not so duly elected regime, right? It's just, inki hai, the opposition, why is the opposition walking away from this with no responsibility to the larger cause? So yes, Imran Khan has not been a very, perhaps he's a disingenuous person, perhaps he has harassed the people of the country in one way or the other, but he is the duly elected prime minister. He has tried his best. There's no economic argument against him. In one of my stories I just did, I interviewed Uzair Yunus, one of your former guests, or one of my go-to guys.
ताज्जुब हुआ था उसका quote पढ़कर.
Right. So Uzair said it. There's no economic reason. Uzair Yunus is the director of the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council. He's not a gadha like me, right? पढ़ा लिखा आदमी. मुझे ऐसा बेवकूफ नहीं है. कहता है there's no economic reason, there's no economic justification to kick out Imran Khan.
But he's been also a vocal critic of the economic policy of PTI over the past 2-3 years. I think what he meant was कि अभी जो उसको निकाला जा रहा है वो economic justification की वजह से नहीं निकाला जा रहा.
No, he said that you have to read Imran Khan's, you have to judge Imran Khan's economic performance with the caveat and on the curve of that he inherited this, didn't make it, inherited it. B, there's a little thing called COVID going on. So yeah, I think those are good qualifiers.
3 podcasts हैं उज़ैर के साथ specifically on PTI and their economic policies. So let's not get into that specifically. When we talk about, their involvement, and you've been quite vocal about reporting on the military is not reporting for the military. And I 100% agree with you. Especially left or liberal से मेरा ये एक खदशा है भी, एक author से मेरी argument भी हो गई थी, who was against discounts for veterans. And I said, आप अगर यूएस में जाएं, वो लिटरली स्टारबक्स जो एक प्राइवेट कंपनी है वो वेटरन्स को डिस्काउंट देती है. वेटरन्स डे होता है. आपकी लड़ाई सिपाही से नहीं है. इफ यू मेक इट अबाउट द सोल्जर, इफ यू मेक इट अबाउट द गाय स्टैंडिंग एट सियाचिन, यू आर गोइंग टू लूज एवरीथिंग. There's some people who may have had issues, and I think PMLN was quite smart about reducing it to 2 people. So in your reporting, when people accuse you of being a boy's boy, do you look at it कि हाँ maybe कुछ चीजें मैंने गलत कर दी थी, or do you just see it as bullshit and that's not what you would do?
I think I'm only as good as my sources. Number one, that goes for David Sanger, who is on my shelf, who is the chief national security correspondent of the New York Times. When you have to work with a source, then you have to, in a way, live and breathe that story as well. So 2 or 3 things. First of all, reporting on the army is not reporting for the army, number one. Number two, I think I have single-handedly, and there's not a lot of people who can make this claim, I think I have single-handedly, right from the beginning of my career, tried to make us understand the day job of these people as well, not just their night job. All right. Now, we all know history speaks for itself. They have a night job. Right? They don't let me in on that bit, right? But they have a day job, which nobody from my generation of journalists has done as extensively, as thoroughly, perhaps at the risk of his own life or her own life as I have, right? I have been to places, done things with these guys, which nobody else has gotten close. I mean, close, right? Now, in terms of your point, where it's maybe a few men have done it, and it's really, you can't blame the soldier who's getting frostbitten in the middle of the night in Siachen. I have a slightly larger argument to make. I actually agree with how reporting, analysis, information about the military, in particular the military intelligence apparatus of our country, how it like hurts people, how it pisses people off. I can see where they're coming from. I've always respected the idea that these people may have in principle, primarily because this particular military has had a very different experience with the people, with the state, than, for example, the military right next door in India, right? Even though most countries have a military, right? Every country has a military. The experience, the particularly traumatizing experience that the Pakistani military has made us suffer through as a people over decades, speaks for the angst and the anger and the cynicism and the pessimism which a lot of people from especially the liberal left side of the divide possess. हमें मारा गया हमारे मुल्क को, in a way, there's those war crimes or atrocities in Bangladesh are a proven, academically proven thing. They're just there. The execution of Zia-ul-Haq, the other instances of politicized violence, journalists being killed, dropped, proven. And naval intelligence admitted that my friend Shahzad was it got rough. Sorry, hit him a little too hard. So I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of case-by-case analysis here, but we've had a pretty traumatizing experience across most sections of society and through most of our decades. There was a time when this country loved its army. I think in wartime, in times of war, this country has gone above and beyond for its love for the army. And people have joined it, people have supported the army through the 65 war, through the war on terror, by the way. But that's when it was doing its day job. So I'm the guy who covers the day job, right? And I'm a big fan of covering the day job because that is something which a lot of people didn't understand, because the prism through which most people, especially the folks you've mentioned, most people go to the default mechanism, the default lens of cynicism, pessimism, which is the dark lens. You know, you see these guys through the prism of Zia and Yahya and all the other terrible, evil people who have been through the ranks, right? Who've done stupid stuff. So premised on that, I think I sympathize, in fact, empathize with the people who have who critique the military, or me for that matter. I know where you're coming from, but you have to look at the larger scheme of how this is the world's 6th largest fighting force. It's in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the world. It has the burden of history, of a bloody partition, of a very rough neighborhood. There's not a lot of armies which have survived the breakup of an independent wing, of a wing into civil war. This country has, for whatever reason, managed to get past that. And one of the main reasons it's managed to get past that is because we have such a weak sense of nationalism. We don't have a common national language. Urdu does not qualify. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Go to interior Sindh, nobody speaks Urdu, right? Please. So don't pretend. But the army has been a binding force in that sense. And is it the perfect binding force? No. But you got to deal with what you have. So premised on that, I would say I try to empathize and understand what your friends say. But am I proud of everything I've done? Absolutely. Do I own it? Yes. Am I going to keep on keeping on about that? Sure.
I can't imagine you look at yourself in the tub of the Prime Minister house and are not just a little embarrassed. I can't imagine.
I think it was, firstly, it was my own cameraman. I gave him my own phone and I took that picture. I don't know how the tub of the PM, by the way, is anything. It was sort of I was having fun with it. I was also in the PM's bed, by the way. I was in his bed. I was resting. Yeah, I was in his or hers, whatever, depending on who the PM is. I was in the gym. That show has a lot of things.
I think that's the problem, right? So,
you know what happened? You know what happened? What happened was that the batteries. I have a lovely cameraman. क्या नाम है? भूल रहा हूँ नाम. कौन था ड्यूटी पे उस दिन? But हाँ, Shaheen Gardesi. Shaheen Gardesi is my lead camera. He's done most of the shows of Mahaz. And he was recharging his batteries. And I was really tired, man. And Mahaz was, as you know, Mahaz is conducted from the field. You know, हम suit नहीं पहनते, हम makeup नहीं लगाते. There's no lights, there's no studio, there's no air conditioning. You know, we were on our feet all the time. And the amount of air miles I put in and road miles I put in, I was tired. So we were in the Prime Minister's annex and I was just taking a break, man. Where else do you sit? You know, when you're in the bathroom. So I just laid out.
I think a cop out hai because पूरे show का एक idea था. The idea of the entire show was look at the extravagance of these prime ministers के मुल्क गरीब है और ये देखें इनके टब की साइज देखें, which sort of goes into the agenda of ये corrupt prime minister हैं Nawaz और
No, not really. I think if you listen to my Idariya at the end of the show, to be fair, you have a point.
Let me complete my thought though. Let me complete my thought.
Sure.
Because you did that show as well, and then अगर उसको हम compare करें when you went to Musharraf's apartment, you weren't lying in his tub. You were like,
Musharraf,
wow,
firstly, Musharraf didn't show me his stuff. Secondly, that was an interview. So firstly, it's not that Nawaz Sharif or Mariam Nawaz or whoever the predecessor was, Shahid Khan Abbasi, actually. It's not that he was around to show me that.
But the idea of the show was right कि ये extravagance देखें आप गरीब मुल्क में Prime Minister ऐसे रहता है. Go for it.
Let me firstly answer that first bit. General Musharraf's interview was an interview. It was a one-to-one interview. It was not where I did ask him about his issues with, he wanted to make a comeback. I was like, you're not freaking serious, right? You're not going to go. So General Musharraf, I've interviewed General Musharraf like half a dozen times, right? So when you're interviewing someone, you're interviewing someone. There's a difference. It's a different format.
Interview के साथ there was also a puff piece कि ये देखें ये article लिख रहे हैं. Wow, you're still writing. You're playing. There was also that, right?
There's been puff. There was nothing puff piecey about it. That generated
a little Jimmy Fallon ruffling Trump's hair about it.
That's one man's opinion, but Mahaz was designed to go into people's houses, go into their lives, go into the ambience, go into their heads. Some people we've played golf with, some people we've taken to the firing range from, some people we've hunted with, some people we've done prayed namaz with. So it's unfair to say that it's a puff piece because firstly it was the premise.
अगर हम देख रहे हैं कि Prime Minister extravagant है, गरीब मुल्क है, एक पूरा show हो रहा है. You're not doing that at GHQ. You're not doing it at judicial quarters. You're not doing it other idare.
The Prime Minister House piece. This is the evolution of that piece. The Prime Minister House piece was, firstly, the Prime Minister House was empty, right? Because the Prime Minister, the newly elected Prime Minister, didn't want to live there in the first place. And when I was approached for the piece, And by the way, two people did the show. First of all, Maria, what's her name? Maiman did the show. Nobody watched it because it was just, whatever. Right?
She didn't lie in the bathtub.
No, I don't think it was about the bathtub. I think it was the overall premise that for me, I was like, I showed the yes, the extravagance, the vulgarity, the opulence of how our leaders in the past have lived. It isn't just the Sharifs who've lived there. Every leader since the 70s has lived in that, whenever that place went up, has lived in that house, to be fair, number one. So it wasn't about them. The opulence, the extravagance, the vulgarity of it wasn't just gosh, it wasn't just disgusting. It was also quite sad. And at the end of the show, if you bothered enough to get past it, if you watch my end, I was like, listen, we understand, and I'm going to try to paraphrase that. Listen, I understand that you're the prime minister, whoever's lived here is the prime minister, and this is, you have a very large stature, and rutba aapka bahut bada hai, and aapko crores vote mile hain, isliye aap idhar aaye hain, that's great. You deserve this. You need to make important decisions. That's all good. But then let's also have the rest of the country looking like this, yeah? Let's also have our trains looking like this, and our airports looking like this, and our schools looking like this. And I say that unequivocally. And that, unfortunately, is not the part most people get. I think that show was groundbreaking because that show laid bare, despite someone else doing that show laid bare the whole entire gamut of how opulent and unaffortably the Pakistani elite, the Pakistani politically elite lives. And which is one of the reasons that we are where we are today. Is it the only reason? No. Do military mess halls look like that? Perhaps. I don't know, the houses of billionaires who don't pay their taxes look like that?
Absolutely.
More. So please don't kill the messenger, don't shoot the messenger here. Right? If I do find, by the way, the house was empty. Right? The house was empty. Ek mujhe inhone Batman nahi diya jo mujhe guide kar sake, right? I had to go down to the kitchen to ask the cooks ki yaar ye kya kamra tha, and the kitchen wala guy said, he was my producer that day, he said, sir idhar na Miyan sahab idhar khana khate the, to Gilani sahab idhar khana khate, right? Because so I had an empty, let me finish, wrap up. I had a blank canvas, and I painted a picture which was important to understand. After the show was over, I tweeted my own picture, and somebody retweeted it and became a thing. Am I embarrassed about it? Absolutely not. In fact, the original meme was my own. So very happy to cover it. Nobody's been there, and it is an exquisitely large bathtub, and I recommend you hang out in it if you become prime minister.
ये conclusion बिल्कुल ठीक है. Political opulence is disgusting. Political elite जिस तरह रहती है, it is disgusting जब मुल्क गरीब है. लेकिन आपकी judicial elite भी उसी तरह रहती है. आपकी military elite भी उसी तरह.
I just said that.
But we didn't get Mahaz's on that, right? We have to see this piece because in context of what was happening at that time. Where Imran Khan was talking about.
That's silly. If you let me be. If you let me be in an empty GHQ and say, hey man, just do your show, what do you think I'll do? If you let me be in a Nawaz Sharif's or Imran Khan's empty London apartment, what do you think I'll do?
No, we didn't. We should have gotten political elite भी रहती है, military elite रहती है, financial elite भी रहती है जो tax नहीं देते, which we didn't get because in context, this is what Imran Khan was harping on about as well. You remember at the same time there was talk कि ये PM की गायें भैंसें इनको बेच के हम कर्जा उतारेंगे, PM की गाड़ियां हैं ये बेच के हम कर्जा, ridiculous ideas like governor house from university, ridiculous ideas.
But tell me, why were there guys and asses? I'm not even sure if that's the right term.
The idea
why were there buffaloes in the PM house, bro?
But this is the idea ना कि आप आवाम को क्या लॉलीपॉप दे रहे हैं कि ये PM की गाड़ी बेच के आपका कर्ज उतर जाएगा. Whereas they sold those cars and then ordered cars which were worth even more. This is what Nikkei was on about. This is why
we're paying for that. And Imran Khan has failed a lot of. He's overpromised and underdelivered. I thought we'd finish that part of the conversation.
That's the problem, right? So a piece like that, in context of that, with, I think there was also a clip of you driving a Jeep with a PTI flag when PTI won.
No, I was not driving a Jeep in a PTI flag. I have a Jeep. I had a Jeep with a PTI flag. I just sold it before I came here. Yeah. What's that? What's the question there though?
ये किसी
मेरी
ने
Jeep
पूछा
थी,
है
अपनी
कि
Jeep.
ये bias नहीं लगता?
अभी are people listening to us live?
नहीं, लोगों ने questions भेजे हैं.
Achha.
One of the better broadcast journalists of Pakistan, we had two pro PTI after 2018 elections. I remember him parading on a Jeep with a PTI flag, saying it's a Naya Pakistan or something. I remember thinking, dude, you got to be impartial and objective as a journalist. I was disappointed at this display of bias.
I think that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I think that's fair. I think I was driving home from work. It had been a long day. And I literally, the PTI mall में हमारा दफ्तर है, mall के through जा रहा था. Mall में नहीं दफ्तर, Davis Road पे दफ्तर है. I used to drive back and forth in Jeep. I miss it. And लड़के सड़कों पे निकले हुए थे. And मैंने झंडा लिया, मैंने लगा दिया. That's it. But in गिरदेजी मेरे साथ था. Should we have done that in a more personally speaking? Should my personal views or personal partisan politics come in? No, not at least not my work. But to qualify and explain the larger picture, I don't think journalists should vote. I don't think judges should vote. I think those are the two aspects of society who shouldn't vote, judges and journalists. And I think it's primarily because we can't, it's my whole church versus state thing. I'm not the only person who thinks this. There's an entire litany of legalese about this. Tum vakilo, you should know. People have weighed in on this. There's an entire argument about whether journalists should vote. And I've never voted. And as long as I'm a journalist, whether it's here or there, I don't think journalists should vote. And I did not vote in that election. But did I get... was I trying to have some fun on election night? Did I get carried away? Perhaps.
With great power comes great responsibility. I think लोग किस तरह perceive करते हैं.
I don't have great power, dude. I'm not Spider-Man.
You were editor at Dunia News. Your show was watched by thousands of people. There is a responsibility.
Millions, but yeah. Mea culpa.
मुझे वो सोल्जर वाली बात पे वापस आना था, बट क्योंकि मुशर्रफ का इंटरव्यू का जिक्र हो गया, I can't imagine Anderson Cooper if he's sitting with Putin right now and Putin talks about killing descendants abroad and Anderson Cooper is laughing with him. उसका career खत्म हो जाएगा. So there is a clip of you where Musharraf is talking about killing descendants abroad and you're laughing at it.
But listen to the whole interview, man. I was shocked. I was like, what are you saying, bro? That was my thing. I was like, you're kidding me. Listen,
you've had friends who've died and you're sitting there flippantly being like, ha, आप मरवा देते हैं. Thoda
I was like, I didn't say मरवा देते हैं.
Marwana, General Saab, is not proactive diplomacy. It is a proactive act of assassination.
नहीं. Everyone is doing it, for heaven's sake.
Israeli मरवाते हैं.
Everyone is doing this. अगर हम समझ रहे हैं हम करेंगे तो हमें यही करना चाहिए जो दुनिया का तरीका है.
तो आप कह रहे हैं कि मुल्क दुश्मन कोई बाहर बैठा है दुबई में या लंदन में मरवा दो उसे?
हम तो नहीं मरवाएंगे, लेकिन वो खत्म हो गया, हमें तो नहीं पता, किसी ने मार दिया होगा उसे.
Do you have someone in mind?
I have many in mind. बात ये है, this is the way of the world.
You're kidding. Something. Like I said क्या बात कर? नहीं, go watch the show. Watch it. आँख में देखा. नहीं
quite clear वो है कि
नहीं. That clip is bloody breaking news, man. And it's because I got it out of him. Now, whether that's the stated policy or the unstated policy of the military, you've got a former chief of army staff, former president saying, yeah, I don't mind international assassination program. Yeah, they really do it, and the Americans do it, and everybody does it. I should do it too. What do you think? I'm like, weird. Let's keep going on, because I didn't know what else to say. But should I just like get on his
yeah.
I didn't have a follow-up. And perhaps in the premise of that show, in the overall arc of that show, maybe there was time for a follow-up. Did I deliver on it? No, but I'm pretty pretty freaking proud that I got that on the record. Everybody's interviewed Musharraf. Everybody's interviewed him thousands of times. And there's not one show where a potentially devastatingly atrocious, dangerous policy is coming out. If it is a policy, it's coming out to the fore. That's quite, I think, if anything, if anything, I think I should be getting props for that because I got that out. Was it a nervous laughter? Sure. Was I egging him on? No, sir.
I think that's quite a fair answer. As somebody who also hosts these podcasts, कभी-कभी आप nervously laugh कर लेते हो और वो किसी और से perceive हो जाता है. I completely understand where you're coming from.
हट गई थी मेरी भाई, हट गई थी. But it was like, देखो, it's also I have, as you can maybe tell, I have a very engaging sort of back and forth thing. That's how I conducted my interviews. I don't sit there and say, Assalamu alaikum, Nazreen. I don't do that shit. And that's just never been my thing and never will be, right? And I think that is when you talk to people yes, I've done it. It's not fun. I've done it, right? I'm surprised you haven't talked to me about Zardari yet and that interview, but I'm wondering which rainy day you're keeping that one for. But premised on this, I think I made him comfortable. I was doing a laugh-along thing. He was playing cards when I walked in. He was doing whatever the hell with his friends were in the other room. So I was trying to just get the most out of him. And I think as an interviewer, that's my job, to get the most out of someone. And whether that includes nervous laughter, I'm not there to slit your throat, right? That's not what they pay us for. They pay us for trying to get inside the mind of someone and trying to get them comfortable enough to tell you the truth. I am not the Prosecutor General of Pakistan. I am not a public office holder. My job is to interview people, confront them, but not challenge them to the morality of what they're doing. I've interviewed terrorists before. I've interviewed people who've killed people before. It's not my job I've interviewed hitmen from the MQM on TV. It's not my job to do that. That's not my job. Sorry. So if you think that's my job, go watch someone else because it's not my job.
I think that's quite a fair answer. Do you have any thoughts on the Zardari interview? Because मुझे soldier वाला सवाल
Do you have a question? What were you saving that for?
मैंने नहीं देखा तो I don't know what you're even referring to.
In that case, let's just let it go then.
So if we come back to the soldier, the idea of empathizing with the soldier. So for instance, अभी तालिबान जो है, TTP जो है, even जो पेशावर में attack हुआ.
You haven't heard the interview with Zardari at the eve of his own legal problems, where I asked him in a piece which went rather viral, where I asked him about his reputation problem and being called Mr. 10%. You haven't seen that?
Might have when it came out.
Might have when it came out.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah, what am I missing out on? Help me here.
You're just missing out on the greatest hits, bro. You're missing out on the greatest hits. I'm surprised.
Black album.
Yeah. Metallica.
So जो empathize with the soldier वाला idea है. How does one, really empathize with the soldier? जिस तरह अभी हमारी Taliban policy जो है पाकिस्तान की deep state
I don't know.
It has
I'm not DGISPR. That's not my job.
But I'm just thinking how does one balance the two, right? Because our soldiers are now dying because TTP has been emboldened by the Taliban. And हमारी state policy is pro-Taliban, which has helped the TTP. अभी जो पेशावर में भी blast हुआ, it was by somebody who was released from jail by the Taliban. And हमारी stated government policy है pro-Taliban. और अगर हम कुछ बोलें तो हमें descendants बना दिया जाएगा. But my soldier is dying on the border because of the foolish policies we've used and this idea of strategic depth.
I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think strategic depth is usually misunderstood. I think the us versus them, the Taliban versus Afghan Taliban versus Pak army thing is much more complicated than that. I think there's very fluid groups and relationships which exist in that part of the world. And I think a lot of it has to do with policies of the past. A lot of it has to do with current requirements, whether you like it or not. Got to work with the Haqqanis. They're in Kabul. And whether you like it or not, the Haqqanis have the mind of their own. And whether you like it or not, they may have linkages with other groups because that's how they work. It's not just I am the Pakistani Taliban or I am the Afghan Taliban. There's groups within groups and groups. And just like that, on the other side of the divide, less so, because our security regime, our security guys, mostly guys, not a lot of girls there, not yet. Hopefully that day will come when women weigh into our security and foreign policy mechanisms as well. But till now, it's mostly guys. And those guys have their own opinions, like anybody does. It's not a homogenous organization. It's a heterogeneous organization. But do I agree with a certain narrative which was propelled around a decade ago that there's a state within the state, the ISI is in no one's control, they're doing their own thing, they don't even listen to their own bosses? I don't think so. I think the pivotal moment has been, and the case in point has been, regarding Pakistan's rather sound counterterrorism mechanism, internally speaking, has been under the Kiyani regime, where the war on terror was envisioned, initially badly bungled, but then they came around to that. Rahil Sharif continued that. I think the critical bit for, like I said, I like to look at arcs. You can't just be like, the Peshawar attack mein ye ho raha hai, or there's a larger arc here, right? It can't just be the Pakistani Taliban and now being backed up with the Afghan Taliban. That's what the shit show is happening. No, sir. So in the larger scheme, the pivotal moment was when General Ashfaq Parvez Kiyani became the first, historically very important to understand, became the first ISI chief to become army chief. And I think that's where the alignment of the two institutions, because one is a part of the other, but had, because of its own growth spurt, its own momentum, its own rules and regulations and SOPs, one had sort of started doing its own thing. Sure, there was a moment. There was a slip between the cup and the lip. But I think Kiyani really streamlined them. There was then, following his regime, there was a whole litany of deputy DGs, two-star generals, who started also making it through the ranks and appearing and running the right corps and running the right staff positions. So you sort of saw how there was once upon a time where the bad boys of the organization would end up in the ISI. Some people said it's the bottom of the barrel, but famous army chief, God bless his soul, Asif Nawaz Janjua, once, I mean, I know this from, first-hand sources, once met an ISI officer and said ke, tum fauj mein, matlab, you shouldn't be in the army, tum logon ka apna wo hona chahiye, right? So there was a very because once you sort of go on the intel side, right, you sort of start thinking on your own way. So he thought he was very proper infantryman, proper Punjab regiment type. So he said, no, yeah, you guys are. But those days are very Sandhurston, they're gone. Wo fauj khatam hogi. Now you got to have guys who can, drive on the left side of the road and drive on the right side of the road. And because the conventional war is very different from counter-terror ops. So wo zuban aapko aani chahiye. I have seen generals, brigadiers, colonels have work on their Pashto, even though they're Punjabi. I have seen them look at, draw with markers. Mujhe yaad hai main kidhar tha. I think I was with the brigade in Parachinar or whatever. No, it was one of the more tribal areas. And there was a general who was, when I came in, he was literally, because whiteboard nahi tha, right? Frontline thi, trench tha. So he was general nahi tha, brigadier tha. So he was drawing a sort of flow chart of the different tribes, right? And I was like, what are you doing, man? And he's like, dude, it's a very complicated tribal system, And the thing is, if I go to someone's janaza, then I can't call on someone else because wo ladai hai, right? So I have to be very careful because I have a job to do here, which is stabilize this damn place, not make it erupt. Because मुझ पे वो attack कर देंगे अगर मैं उससे मिलने गया, मैं उसकी शादी पे गया तो मुझे वो attack कर, right? So it's not just के Taliban versus Pak army. No, it's not that. It's a very, very complex, very heterogeneous, messy part. And I think the military's done a pretty stand-up job considering the shit show next door. I think they've done a pretty stand-up job. Is it 100% under their control? No. And is it coming up because of the Afghan Taliban? Yes. You're right. You're on to something.
Again, this is a much bigger conversation. But what I was getting at with that example is sometimes what's best for the soldier may be against the institutional policy. And there's not much space to have that conversation. I mean, you did reporting on APS. It was heartbreaking. And literally watching you and that picture, we can see the pain even in the still picture. It's pain that's felt by the entire country. Now, a few of the parents of the APS have said some things which can be considered against the army. They've spoken at PTM as well, and they've not been given any space, not even on social media, let alone mainstream media. I'm just thinking as somebody who wants to, talk about these things, have these podcasts, how do we have those tough conversations?
I think if your answer is seeking for some sort of a mechanism for the army to be more cognizant of the demands of people, I think there's enough formal avenues in place. I think they have their own public diplomacy campaign, which is run by ISPR. I'm not sure how how reciprocal it is. But they have because they're the army, and they're not just any army. They're the goddamn Pakistan army. So they're very close to the ground to what's happening, what the pulse of the people is. I'm not sure if that is an accurate read. I think but I think there is some urgency to the fact that General Qamar Javed Bajwa of 16 Baluch, 16th Army Chief of Pakistan, was at Lums recently. I think that says something. When, not too long ago, in the great scheme, Lums kids were being trolled on social media. Lums teachers were being picked up by goons related to the security forces. There was a shit show at Lums. And you got the army chief there now. So I think within a few years, there's been a recognition of Lums as very, very important, very, very alternative, critical, crucial movement, which has been born at Lums in a way, and which has been perpetuated by its students, its thinkers, its teachers, very brave of them. I think while the initial reaction was very knee-jerk, very let's screw these guys, right? But they can't, right? You can't. And I think the turnaround within a span of 5-6 years is that the chiefs had to go there, right? They were calling 4 or 5 years ago, they were calling students to GHQ. And he would sit there, not this guy, the previous guy, and, lectures sunna jata tha. And ISPR was giving internships to these bloody poor students, but you've seen a very different engagement now. And I feel like to answer your question even more directly in terms of how to streamline what the public is thinking with what the institution is thinking, I think one of the great formal mechanisms is the National Security Council. I think Pakistan is unfortunate that its NSC was formed too late after too much drama. I think too much political bad blood has been created because of the NSC. It led to the resignation of Jahangir Karamat, which led to Musharraf's, in a way, the bad blood led to Musharraf's coup. So it's become a very overly politicized institution. I think there's NSC in every country. There is an avenue in every reasonable country, every civilized country has a place where the generals can come and say, Mr. Prime Minister or Madam Prime Minister, this is what we think. because they are privy to information which normal folks, normal civilians are not. So it can't be, and it has to be an institutional approach. There has to be the intelligence forces in there, the Navy and the Air Force in there. It can't just be like the 17th COAS, if he comes in, talking to the 23rd Prime Minister. We can't be broing our way through this, right? This is the world's 6th largest country's duly elected government talking to the world's 6th largest army, right? So there has to be institutional interfacing. And I think if we concentrate on improving the NSC through Mueed Yusuf, through Janjua, his predecessor, it's becoming something. You can see that. Whether what you think of Mueed Yusuf or General Janjua before him, Nasir Janjua, is irrelevant. It's not about people. It's about institutions. Bajwa's going to go one day. Imran's going to go one day. Mueed's going to go one day. New guys will come in. But the fact is that now, thank God, there is an NSC where the brass can sit in front of the duly elected officials and talk shop. And I think that's important.
I know it's a much longer conversation. I want to keep 10 minutes for Q&A as well. But since हम ये discussion कर ही रहे हैं, ये जो एक perception है कि our army is colonial and they think of civilians as bloody civilians, कि इनको तो कुछ भी नहीं आता. थोड़ी बहुत justified है ये perception that the army does sort of see itself as over the people and it needs to control the people as opposed to being an army of the people. And जो थोड़ी army की भी insecurity है, maybe it's after 1971 कि वो ज़्यादा ही insecure हो गए हैं. How do you see this relationship?
Yeah, it's a tall order because the thing is that firstly, this whole bloody civilian thing is so funny. It's so funny. It exists and it doesn't exist, right? I mean, every Fauji from any country, doesn't. They think they're onto something and you're not, right? Because these guys are trained to fight. They're trained to kill. They're trained to jump off a goddamn moving aircraft in the middle of the night, land into enemy territory and F things up, right? He doesn't think much of you, man. Because I can tell looking at your shoulders, you can't bench over 200 pounds, right? So this guy, I mean, there's got to be a natural thing, right? So it's not just the army which thinks, every paid professional warrior thinks like that. Niche mera doorman, right, who's a former Marine, right? He thinks of that, even though my lamba choda, right?
He's like, army people are just dignified gym bros.
No, yeah, in a way, it's a natural thing. Now compound that, multiply that with Pakistan's experience with, politicize that, right? And you come with a very toxic, very, very dangerous sort of a gym bro, right? Who doesn't think much of you. But I think the larger story has to be understood. I think this is nobody lives in a bubble. Cantonments have a lot of civilian interfacing. The days of the British Raj army, which lived in particular garrisons, particular camps, and only worked with the Viceroy's office and didn't really I think those days have been long gone because it was soon after I think it was soon after the First World War when they started inducting not just Sipahis, but also officers, brown officers, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs in the British Indian Army. So calling it that colonial thing is, all the armies in this neighborhood are colonial. That means they're very, very, very traditionally, they're grounded in colonial legacies and colonial traditions. And they're very proud of that. They hang on to that. But it is a volunteer army. It is not a conscripted army. It is people who say, all right, you know what, I'm going to sign up. And if that means that I have to die, that's no problem either, right? And I think they're very proud of that particular bit. There's never been a draft, to my knowledge. They've considered it a couple of times. There's never been really a drafted, conscripted thing. And you realize that issue with this Putin's conscripted army. We're seeing that on the ground right now. But coming back to your question, even more to really zero in, there is increased civilian interface in the garrisons. there's people who's like, एक भाई फौजी है, तो दूसरा भाई डॉक्टर है, तो तीसरा भाई वो है, तो चौथा भाई वकील है. There's people like that when they sit together. They don't live in their own bubble. So I'm sure, you know, I know मेरा एक बड़ा अच्छा दोस्त है जिसका एक भाई literally डॉक्टर है और एक भाई अमेरिका में रहता है, right? तो वो उन्हें बैठ के गालियां नहीं देता कि ओए you're a sellout, तुम अमेरिका में हो, ओए तुम तो फजूल हो, bloody civilian doctor हो, तुम्हें क्या पता, मुझे ही पता है, right? They're all very close actually. So and one sees that, and the dinner debates in that house are quite interesting to see as well, right? Where I've been invited a couple of times. So they know what's going on in that sense because of the structure. However, if you've made up your mind, like some of them have made up their mind about you, if you've made up your mind about them, that this guy's a goon, and he's made up his mind about you that this guy's a bloody civilian, then I don't think we're going to meet anywhere in the middle. I think those are very stated, difficult, and polarized positions. But as we know, the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely, I think Michael Phelps को भी आप क्रिकेट खिला देंगे तो उसे नहीं खेला जाएगा. Personal relations तो obviously सबके होंगे, but one if economists start thinking, if Atif Mia thinks कि मैं battalion चला सकता हूँ, उनसे नहीं चलेगी. So जिसकी जो expertise है उसमें है, we just have 8 minutes for our 90-minute deadline. So I'm going to run through these questions. Maybe let's just get rapid fire answers. Does he believe every Pakistani has a right to determine their future themselves?
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Ask him his favorite college football team except Dumich and the NFL team without Trump.
Okay, college football besides Michigan. It's a tough call. I don't want to, but they're not in the same. They're not in the same league. So the Longhorns, Texas.
If Mahaz is still on, top 5 guests he would like to invite.
If Mahaz is still on, top 5 guests. Imran Khan, Nawaz Sharif, and Mariam together, by the way, because I think that is one organism now. Shabazz is, maybe it's third. Yeah, maybe, but definitely Asif Zardari and Qamar Javed Bajwa.
How does the ISI in Pakistan military actually work? He has a great thread about ISI, so would like him to expand on that.
I don't understand. Repeat the question.
How does the ISI and the Pakistan military actually work? He had a great thread about ISI, so would like him to expound on that.
Read the thread. I mean, it's a very long thread. It's too weedy. It's too inside baseball. But read the thread and do some push-ups.
ये मैं already पूछ चुका हूँ, at least मैं more or less पूछ चुका हूँ. How do journos interview the likes of Musharraf in their fancy London and Dubai flats and not once ask the question, Sarji, how are you affording this lifestyle?
Because the premise of the interview is, firstly, Musharraf has several times stated that his earnings from his book are behind his current lifestyle. He's got a apartment in Dubai. It's not a very fancy apartment. It's a good apartment. It's not a dump, right? But it's not some crazy Arab sheikh penthouse either. And he's been quite clear, and he said this more than a few times, that his book, In the Line of Duty or Duty Under Fire or whatever.
In the Line of Fire.
And the Line of Fire is where he got most of his earnings. And just so you know, when a 4-star general resigns, it's a pretty lucrative package he gets. So I think it's quite mundane to ask someone a question when they've been on the record about it several times.
What's Pakistan's biggest issue? Democracy or hypocrisy, corruption or introspection? Yeah, deep philosophical sawal.
I think Pakistan's biggest problem is identity. I think there's too many Pakistans. It was made in a hustle and it lost its sense of identity very early on. The guy who had some sort of a notion of what he was going for left us too soon. And I think we lost that boat has since sailed. And since his demise, I'm of course talking about the Qaid, since his demise, and the only, like I said, there's not a lot of papers he's written. There's just a couple of speeches, which people keep on, the left versus the right keeps on throwing those around. On the one hand, there's his 14 points. And on the other, there's that constituency assembly address. And the एक कहता है कि नहीं ये था, तो दूसरा कहता है नहीं ये था, तो ये debate और वो चले जा रही है. But since we couldn't identify what our identity was, what our brand was, I think we faltered with, firstly, bureaucrats ruled us, then technocrats ruled us, then autocrats ruled us. Within this 10 years of Pakistan's foundation, we had half a dozen prime ministers, a military dictator, and a dead founder, and an assassinated first prime minister. So the nationality, or the question of identity and nationalism, was bloodied by the waters of death, assassination, intrigue, power struggles, which sort of have carried on literally to the day. Our biggest problem is that we had a very, very unclear birth. हमारा नाम भी बदला गया है. खाली हमारा रकबा नहीं. So हमारा नाम भी बदला गया. We used to be the Republic of Pakistan. One day some guy decided the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So somebody who changes their name on birth, then changes the size of their, thing. उसका क्या होगा?
You mentioned birth. अजीब सा सवाल है. What is his thoughts on Imran Khan having a daughter out of wedlock?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have always wondered about that question. There's interesting data out there. He's obviously never addressed this question. The question hasn't really come up in any of his, strangely enough, any of his public appearances. And I'm quite shocked that it hasn't come out. I haven't asked this question because, again, for me personally, I don't know about how I feel asking a public official or about to be elected public official about this particular quandary. It's because it's, in a way, it's a very personal question. That's one part of me, which, if it's true, clearly a lot of people think it is true. So I will go with that narrative. But I feel like
has adopted her. So
yeah. So that's pretty clear where that cookie has crumbled. But I feel like Imran Khan at times has just been made of Teflon. Nothing has stuck on it. Nothing has stuck. And even this charge, if it is duly processed, I don't see how or why it's relevant to ask someone. B, I don't see how or why, and maybe I sound a little too perhaps progressive, but I don't think it's an issue. I think there's larger issues. I don't think it's
follow-up bhi unhone pucha hai, what if somebody has a daughter out of wedlock through non-consensual sex?
That's a pretty silly question to ask. Obviously, I mean, if the person has been involved in rape, that is a crime, and it's one of the most disgusting, heinous crimes on God's given earth. So it's just that's not. I mean, I don't know how the two can be equated as parallels. They're not.
Thank you so much, Wajahat, for your time. Is there any message you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah, actually, I do have a message. I think, well, firstly, everybody should get very fit. I think should stay fit.
Personally attack करने की क्या जरूरत थी मुझे?
मैं personally attack नहीं कर रहा था. अगर तुम पे attack, if you felt like
I felt it. If the shoe fits.
Right. Maybe I was paying you back for not doing your research on Zardari.
Just because I did see one interview. I also noticed the sly boast where I said thousands and you were like, millions watched my show.
It's not a boast. It's a data point. It's a data point, right? But no. I think personal wellness is very important. I think you should work out. You should be mentally and physically fit. If you're watching this, I think I can't place a better premium on it. I think a place like Pakistan, which I really miss, but I think the one thing which I don't miss is there's not enough sports, there's not enough fitness. Cigarettes are very cheap. like any good journalist, I used to smoke, and that really got in the way. I've quit. If you do smoke, quit. Say no to drugs. Get fit, get fast, because that really affects everything. It affects your reading, it affects your understanding of events, it makes you productive, it makes you a nicer, better human being, I feel like. And it really starts with just being mentally and physically sound. Physically sound, then you get mentally sound pretty quickly. That's one. That's just lifestyle advice. Secondly, I think overall, when it comes to following the different streams of political narratives in Pakistan, I think you should try. We're not an easy left versus right country, right? We're not the GOP is on the right and the Democrats are on the left, and this is two-party system. We're not
at this point,
right? Yeah, but we're not that. We're not, nobody is. And even those two in the two-party system, even they have their different. So learn how to appreciate, you live in a multi-party system, learn how to appreciate the larger scheme. And in this multi-party system, as we have discussed, there are political players who are not a party, but they're still political players. So learn how to understand them. Everybody's coming from somewhere, right? So Qamar Javed Bajwa was maybe he was, I don't know, how he's 62 right now. So he was a teenager when Bhutto was being hung. Like, it's not, blaming him or whoever else for the army's crimes, nonetheless, crimes, is sort of limiting, right? Meanwhile, blaming Bilawal Bhutto for Zarebi's questionable behavior during the 70-71 civil war and crisis is also limiting. Bilawal wasn't even conceived. He wasn't even on planet Earth. So saying that tumhare nane ne mulk toda tha, dafa ho ja, is two sides to the same coin, right? So it's really limiting to not see the long arc of tragedy that has been inflicted upon this country generation after generation. But I think at the end of the day, the third thing and the last thing I'm going to say is that in terms of whether it's the political divide, people versus the army, or the army versus the politicians, or whatever this mishmash is, I think one thing you need to understand is who we are as a people, is that we are a very, constitutionalism is in our gut, right? We were literally like, we were created by a lawyer, a guy who we aren't a revolutionary state. We're a very thoughtful state. We're very well constructed in that sense. We were argued into existence. We were written into existence. Jinnah was a lawyer. He was a thinker in that sense. We are not some sort of we're not a GCC country. We're not a North Korea. We're not. There was a lot of trauma, but we are still constitutionalists at our core, and we need to revisit what that means. There have been times when things are so bad and so dark in terms of our leadership that sometimes we are forced to pick, even hope for some sort of savior to come in, even if it's illegal or extra-constitutional, some sort of savior to come in and save us. As I remember as a younger man, I remember pictures, I was in college, but I remember people were happy when Musharraf took over. You can't stage that shit. No, it's true. People were giving mithai, so you can't stage that. It wasn't staged, real, right? But was it the right thing to celebrate? I'm not quite sure if it was. So we need to understand that, yes, we have, as I stated earlier, we have an identity problem. But I think deep inside that problem, our truest identity is that we are not a revolutionary state. We are a constitutionally constructed state, and that should always remain. Debate, discourse, choosing our own destiny, etc., and everything else which goes with that constitutionalism, especially debate and discourse, which is what this is, should be the focus of all our moves, whether we make it in the professional sphere, or the personal sphere, or the political sphere. So I think that's important. Understand that.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for that message. Is there anything that you're up to that you want to plug? Where can people find you?
You can find me in New York City's Upper West Side. If you decide to come, just DM me, and we'll go out for a drink. If you're cool. If you're not cool, it's not going to happen. Besides that, I am at my work can be read and heard. I host Nikkei's Asia Stream podcast. So if you're not into reading, which a lot of people are not, if you're into listening, that's that. I'm also considering starting my own podcast, but I'm not there yet. I don't have the bandwidth. You can read my work on my Twitter, which is Wajahat Khan, at Wajahat Khan. Most of my work is on Twitter, so you should check it out. Besides that, Besides that, I would Besides that, nothing. Just be cool.
Be cool, everybody. And this was cool. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.